Marcus Washington was 46 years old and worked as a senior insurance fraud auditor in Columbus, Ohio. Most people who knew him thought he was the kind of man life quietly passed over. His wife Vanessa handled conversations. Her mother, Lorraine Bennett, handled everyone else. Marcus drove a 12-year-old Honda Accord with rust near the rear tire. He packed turkey sandwiches in reused plastic containers. Every Saturday morning, he climbed onto his own roof with a bucket and a pair of work gloves to clean the gutters himself. What Lorraine Bennett never knew was that Marcus had been recording every phone call she made to his house since the 3rd year of the marriage. The black hard case in his right hand clicked softly as he stepped into Franklin County Domestic Court, and Vanessa's attorney finally asked the judge to open it. If you're watching from somewhere outside the U.S., drop your country and local time in the comments. I always like seeing where these stories reach. And if you enjoy slow burn stories about betrayal, patience, and quiet revenge, subscribe now. Tomorrow's story gets even darker. 18 years earlier, Marcus Washington stood inside a narrow townhouse kitchen in Dublin, Ohio, trying to figure out why the smoke detector kept chirping every 40 seconds. The townhouse cost $214,000, 2 bedrooms, beige siding, small backyard barely large enough for a grill, and 2 folding chairs. Marcus had spent 3 weekends repainting the walls himself because paying contractors would have delayed the down payment another 6 months. Vanessa sat cross-legged on the counter eating takeout from Panda Express while laughing at him. "You replaced the battery twice already," she said. Marcus looked up at the ceiling. "Then the detector's broken." "You sure you weren't in Army intelligence instead of logistics?" He smirked once. Small. Quick. That was the thing about Marcus. Most of his reactions happened quietly. He was 30 years old then. Broad shoulders, short-cropped hair, calm eyes that made him look older than he was. He had already spent 8 years in the Army before taking a civilian position with Mid-State Mutual Insurance, investigating suspicious claims across Ohio. Vanessa loved telling people that part. "My husband catches fraud for a living," she would say proudly at parties. Back then, she still sounded proud. The first year of the marriage felt ordinary in the best possible way. Cheap furniture, shared bills, grocery lists taped to the refrigerator with magnets. From vacations neither of them could really afford. Marcus woke up at 5:15 every morning, coffee, black, ironed shirts, sports radio low enough not to wake Vanessa. He left the house at exactly 6:20. Routine made sense to him. Predictability felt safe. Vanessa was different, louder, social, fast-moving. She liked wine tastings, crowded patios, spontaneous road trips to Cincinnati on weekends. Marcus rarely said no to her ideas. He simply followed at a slower speed. At first, Lorraine Bennett seemed to admire that. Vanessa's mother lived in Upper Arlington in a brick colonial house with white shutters and polished landscaping that looked professionally trimmed year-round. She had retired as a school principal after 31 years and carried herself like someone who still expected hallways to quiet down when she entered a room. She hugged Marcus hard at the wedding rehearsal dinner. "You're steady," she told him in front of relatives. "My daughter needs steady." Marcus believed her. The first warning signs were so small they barely registered. Lorraine asking what Marcus earned during Thanksgiving dinner. Lorraine comparing Marcus's sedan to Vanessa's ex-boyfriend's BMW. Lorraine saying things like, "Well, stability matters more than excitement," eventually. Always smiling after she said it, always laughing softly, always making it sound harmless. Marcus usually ignored it. He grew up in Dayton with a bus driver father and a mother who worked overnight at St. Elizabeth Hospital. He learned early that some people used polished language the same way other people used knives, quiet cuts. One Sunday afternoon 6 months into the marriage, Marcus walked into Lorraine's kitchen while carrying folding chairs from the garage. Lorraine and Vanessa stopped talking immediately. Too quickly. Vanessa reached for her iced tea without looking at him. Lorraine smiled. "Marcus," she said warmly, "I was just telling Vanessa how proud I am that you're so responsible financially." Marcus nodded once, but the room felt strange after that. Tight. Later that night, Vanessa sat at the edge of their bed, removing her earrings in silence. "You ever think about moving into management?" she asked suddenly. Marcus looked up from a claims report. "At work? Yeah, I like investigations. You'd make more in management. We're doing okay." Vanessa shrugged. "Just asking." But she wasn't just asking. After that, the questions came more often. Why didn't Marcus network more? Why didn't he socialize with executives? Why didn't he wear more expensive suits? Why was he always so quiet at dinners? The phrasing sounded familiar after a while, too familiar. Marcus began hearing Lorraine's rhythm inside Vanessa's sentences. One evening they attended a charity fundraiser downtown at the Hilton Columbus. Marcus stood near the back of the ballroom nursing a bourbon while Vanessa spoke with real estate agents near the stage. Lorraine approached him, carrying a wine glass. "You know," she said casually, "Vanessa was always drawn to ambitious men." Marcus looked at her. "She married me." Lorraine smiled lightly. "Yes," she said, "she did." Then she walked away. No direct insult. Nothing concrete enough to confront. That was Lorraine's talent. Everything stayed deniable. Months passed. The phone calls increased. Every morning before work, every night after dinner, sometimes during dinner, Vanessa would leave the room carrying her phone and return colder than before. Arguments started appearing from nowhere. A forgotten grocery item became evidence Marcus didn't listen. Working late became proof he prioritized work over family. Asking about expenses became financial pressure. Marcus noticed patterns because patterns were his profession. Insurance fraud taught him that lies rarely appeared fully formed. They accumulated, tiny pieces layered slowly until the story felt real. One Friday night, Marcus came home from investigating a suspicious warehouse fire near Toledo. 4-hour drive. Rain the entire way back. He walked inside exhausted. Vanessa stood in the kitchen with crossed arms. "You checked our joint account again," Marcus blinked. "I paid the electric bill. You don't trust me with money. That's not what happened. You monitor everything I spend." Marcus stared at her. 3 days earlier, Lorraine had made a joke during dinner about men who use bank accounts to control women. Same wording, same tone, same accusation. Marcus set his keys down carefully. "We share finances," he said quietly. "That's normal." Vanessa laughed once without humor. "You sound exactly like my father." Marcus had never met Vanessa's father. The man left when she was 7. That comment did not come from nowhere either. The fight lasted 40 minutes. Marcus barely raised his voice once. Vanessa cried near the end. Then she locked herself in the bathroom. Marcus sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. At 11:14 p.m., Vanessa's phone rang again. Lorraine. Marcus watched the bathroom light turn on beneath the door. Another 40-minute call? The next morning, Vanessa barely spoke to him. 3 weeks later, Lorraine hosted Sunday dinner at her house. Pot roast, green beans, sweet tea in tall glasses. Family photos lined every hallway. Marcus noticed Lorraine watching him while everyone ate. Not openly, carefully. Studying reactions. Testing pressure points. After dessert, Marcus stepped into the hallway near the laundry room, searching for the restroom. That was when he heard Lorraine's voice from the kitchen. Soft, certain. "You married a man who survives," she told Vanessa, "not a man who leads." Silence followed. Marcus stood motionless beside the hallway table. Then Vanessa answered quietly enough that he almost missed it. "I know." Marcus remained there for another 3 seconds. Then he walked into the bathroom, closed the door softly, and stared at his reflection in the mirror. while voices continued laughing down the hallway like nothing had happened at all. Marcus Washington did not decide to start recording phone calls after one fight. It happened after patterns became impossible to ignore. The first 2 years of marriage had been difficult but manageable. Arguments came and went. Cold weeks turned warm again. Vanessa still laughed sometimes when Marcus burned pancakes on Sunday mornings. She still curled against his shoulder during movies. But sometime during the 3rd year, reality inside the house started shifting. Conversations changed later. Facts bent. Small disagreements returned weeks afterward, with details Marcus knew had never happened. One Tuesday evening in February, Marcus came home from Cincinnati after investigating a stage burglary claim involving falsified receipts and fake jewelry appraisals. 8 hours on the road. Freezing rain covering Interstate 71 nearly the entire drive. He walked into the townhouse carrying a grocery bag and immediately sensed tension. Vanessa stood beside the sink with red eyes. "You embarrassed me in front of my mother," she said. Marcus paused. "What, at dinner Sunday?" Marcus slowly set the grocery bag down. "I barely spoke at dinner. You mocked my job." "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." Marcus stared at her. His memory worked like a filing cabinet. Precise, ordered, occupational habit. Sunday dinner had included baked chicken football on television and 40 minutes of Lorraine discussing a friend's daughter who married an orthopedic surgeon in Cleveland. Marcus remembered every word he personally said that night. Nothing about Vanessa's job. Nothing insulting. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. "You said real estate assistants just push paperwork around?" Marcus blinked once. "I never said that." "You implied it." "No." "You always do this," Vanessa snapped. "You say things, then act confused later." That sentence stayed with him, not because of the accusation, because of the structure. "You always do this." The same phrasing appeared repeatedly over recent months, almost rehearsed. Marcus noticed repetition professionally. Fraud investigators were trained to notice recycled language because coordinated stories often reused identical emotional framing. That night, Vanessa slept facing the opposite wall. Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly in darkness. At 1:13 a.m., he quietly got out of bed and opened his laptop at the kitchen table. He searched one phrase first: Ohio recording consent law. Then another: can you legally record a phone call in Ohio if one party consents? He read for nearly 40 minutes. Ohio was a one-party consent state, meaning if Marcus himself participated in the conversation recording, it was legal. He leaned back in the chair afterward and listened to the refrigerator humming softly across the kitchen. The decision still felt ugly, not immoral, just heavy. Because recording someone meant Marcus no longer believed words alone could protect him. 3 days later, he stopped at a Best Buy near Polaris Parkway after work. The electronics section smelled faintly like cardboard and plastic packaging. A college-aged employee wearing a blue polo asked if he needed help. Marcus pointed at a small digital recorder locked behind glass. That one. The kid unlocked the case. "Journalism project?" he asked casually. Marcus looked at the recorder. Something like that. He paid cash. The recorder fit in the palm of his hand. Black plastic. Simple controls. 8 gigabytes of storage. Tiny enough to disappear beside a phone charger on the kitchen counter. Marcus drove home through downtown Columbus while snow drifted lightly across the windshield. Part of him still hoped he would never use it. That hope lasted 4 days. The first recording happened accidentally. Vanessa had gone upstairs to shower after dinner. Her phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen counter beside Marcus while he reviewed claim reports. Lorraine's name appeared across the screen. 3 missed calls, then another incoming call immediately after. Marcus stared at the phone for several seconds. Finally, he answered. "Hello," Lorraine paused. "Oh," she said. Where's Vanessa upstairs? I'll wait. Marcus almost hung up. Then Lorraine spoke again. Actually, she said calmly, maybe this is better. Marcus said nothing. He reached into the drawer beside him and pressed record beneath the table without looking down. The tiny red light blinked once. Lorraine exhaled softly into the phone. You know marriage counseling is next Tuesday, right? Yes. Vanessa needs to stop letting you control every conversation in that office. Marcus frowned slightly. I don't control conversations. You do it subtly, Lorraine replied. That quiet routine of yours makes her second-guess herself. Marcus remained silent. He could hear television noise faintly behind Lorraine's voice, probably MSNBC. Lorraine watched it constantly. She needs to interrupt you more, Lorraine continued. Otherwise, the therapist will think you're the reasonable one. Marcus's grip tightened around the phone. What are you talking about? I'm talking about strategy. The word landed cold. Not healing, not communication, strategy. Lorraine lowered her voice slightly. When Vanessa gets emotional, you stay calm. Men like you always do that. It makes women look irrational. Marcus stared at the dark kitchen window above the sink. Snowflakes drifted past the glass. She needs to cry earlier in the session, Lorraine continued, and she needs to stop letting you redirect the conversation toward facts. Facts. Marcus said nothing. Focus on emotional safety, Lorraine said. That phrase matters. Therapists react to that. Upstairs water pipes rattled faintly as Vanessa turned off the shower. Marcus's pulse slowed instead of rising. Years in fraud investigations had trained him that real danger often arrived calmly, not loudly. You're coaching her, Marcus said quietly. Lorraine laughed once. No, she replied smoothly. I'm protecting my daughter. Then she hung up. Marcus sat motionless for nearly a minute. The recorder remained beside his hand, still blinking. He pressed stop carefully. The silence afterward felt different from ordinary silence. Permanent. Marcus replayed the recording immediately. Every word, every pause, every shift in tone. He listened twice more before transferring the file onto his laptop. Then he created a folder, Year 3. Inside it, another folder, Call Recordings, then another Lorraine. Marcus named the file with precise formatting. March 14th, 2008 _LB _counselingstrategy.wave. That was the moment something changed permanently inside him. Not rage, not revenge, structure. He began organizing everything afterward. Digital folders, backup drives, email archives, screenshots, dates, times, descriptions. At work, Marcus investigated staged accidents, fake injuries, fabricated theft claims. He understood one principle better than most people. The truth without documentation became opinion. Weeks passed. More recordings followed. Lorraine coaching Vanessa before arguments. Lorraine encouraging financial suspicion. Lorraine suggesting emotional phrases carefully chosen for impact. Marcus never confronted either woman directly. Instead, he listened, cataloged, observed. One April evening, Marcus sat alone inside his parked Honda outside their townhouse. After returning from work, rain tapped softly against the windshield. Inside the house, kitchen lights glowed warm yellow through the curtains. Vanessa was already on the phone with Lorraine. Marcus could see her silhouette pacing. He picked up the recorder from the passenger seat. For a brief moment, he hated himself for needing it. Then another memory surfaced. Vanessa accusing him of words he never said. Vanessa crying over events that never happened. Lorraine smiling every time confusion spread. Marcus walked inside quietly. By midnight, another recording sat inside the Year 3 folder. At the very end of that call, Lorraine's voice softened almost affectionately. Quiet men are easy to bury, she said. Marcus listened to that sentence 3 separate times before shutting the laptop. Then he placed the recorder inside his desk drawer and turned off the kitchen light. The call from Riverside Methodist Hospital came at 2:11 in the morning. Marcus answered before the second ring. Vanessa's breathing sounded uneven. My water broke. Marcus was already out of bed before she finished the sentence. Outside, freezing rain coated the streets of Columbus in silver reflections. Marcus drove fast but carefully through nearly empty intersections, while Vanessa sat gripping the passenger door handle, her face tense beneath the glow of passing streetlights. Neither spoke much during the drive. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m. when they pulled into the emergency entrance. Marcus carried 2 bags inside at once, Vanessa's overnight bag in one hand, laptop bag in the other. The maternity ward smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Nurses moved calmly through bright white hallways while monitors beeped softly behind closed doors. Everything felt controlled, organized, until Lorraine Bennett arrived. She entered the hospital room 40 minutes later wearing a camel-colored coat over silk pajamas and carrying enough energy for 3 people. "Oh, baby," she said dramatically, rushing to Vanessa's bedside. "How bad are the contractions?" Vanessa immediately reached for her mother's hand. Marcus stepped back automatically to give nurses room. Lorraine barely acknowledged him. From that point forward, the atmosphere inside the room changed. Lorraine answered questions directed at Vanessa. Lorraine corrected nurses. Lorraine updated relatives by phone every 15 minutes from the hallway. Marcus became invisible in stages. At 5:18 a.m., a billing issue interrupted the admission process. Insurance information from Marcus's employer had not updated properly after Midstate Mutual changed providers earlier that year. The admissions coordinator asked Marcus to come downstairs to resolve it before additional treatment authorizations processed incorrectly. "I'll be right back," he told Vanessa. She nodded weakly through another contraction. Lorraine didn't look at him. The billing office sat 2 floors below the maternity ward near the emergency intake area. Marcus spent nearly 40 minutes dealing with paperwork verification calls and pharmacy authorization confusion involving Vanessa's medication coverage. By the time he returned upstairs carrying printed forms and bottled water, the emotional temperature inside the room had shifted. Vanessa looked exhausted. Lorraine looked irritated. "You disappeared," Lorraine said immediately. Marcus blinked. "I was handling the insurance issue." She was terrified. "The hospital asked me to. You should have stayed with your wife." Marcus looked toward Vanessa. "I told you where I was?" Vanessa avoided eye contact. A nurse entered seconds later, interrupting the moment. Marcus let it go. That became a habit over the years, letting things go because challenging them always created larger explosions afterward. Caleb Washington was born at 11:42 a.m. 7 pounds 11 ounces, dark eyes, strong lungs. Marcus held him carefully for the first time while sunlight pushed through the hospital blinds in narrow strips across the floor. For several minutes, nothing else mattered. Not Lorraine, not tension, not exhaustion, just the weight of his son resting against his chest. Then Marcus heard Lorraine talking in the hallway. She was basically alone through most of labor, Lorraine whispered to someone over the phone. Marcus vanished when she needed him. Marcus looked toward the partially open door. The sentence sat inside him like cold metal, not because it was unfair, because it was deliberate. Later that afternoon, Vanessa's cousin Denise visited with balloons and flowers from Giant Eagle. She hugged Vanessa warmly. Then she looked at Marcus and said carefully, "Glad you finally made it back." Marcus understood immediately. The story was already moving, fast. By evening, 3 separate relatives gave Marcus versions of the same sympathetic look, the kind people used when they believed a man had failed quietly. Marcus said nothing. At 8:30 p.m., Vanessa finally fell asleep holding Caleb against her chest. Lorraine stood near the window scrolling through her phone. The city lights outside reflected faintly across the glass. Marcus stepped into the hallway to buy coffee from the vending machines near the elevators. While waiting for the machine to dispense change, he heard Lorraine's voice behind him. She was speaking softly into her phone again. "No," she said. "I'm serious. He left for almost an hour." Pause. "Well, yes, technically it was insurance paperwork, but still, a husband should know priorities." Marcus stared at the vending machine coils turning slowly behind the glass. Lorraine continued, "Vanessa won't say anything because she protects him." Another pause. "I just don't want my daughter settling for emotional neglect her whole life." Marcus picked up the coffee cup without turning around. Then he walked back toward the maternity ward. His face remained calm. Inside, however, something had started hardening. Not anger. Recognition. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table reviewing household bills while Vanessa showered upstairs. The digital recorder rested beside his laptop. He had started carrying it routinely now. Not constantly. Just enough. The house phone rang. Lorraine. Marcus answered quietly. "Hello." "Oh," Lorraine said. "Where's Vanessa upstairs?" A brief silence followed. Then Lorraine sighed. "I suppose this is fine too." Marcus pressed record beneath the table. The tiny click sounded louder to him now. "You know, people are still talking about the hospital," Lorraine said. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair. "People, our family, they're talking because of what you told them." Lorraine gave a soft laugh. "I told them the truth." "No," Marcus replied evenly. "You told them I abandoned Vanessa during labor. You did leave. For insurance authorization. You still left." Marcus rubbed his thumb slowly against the edge of the table. "That's not the story you told." Lorraine's tone sharpened slightly for the first time. "You care too much about wording. I care about accuracy." Another pause. Then Lorraine spoke more softly. "Do you know why people believe me, Marcus?" He said nothing. "Because you never defend yourself." Marcus listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator behind him. Lorraine continued calmly. "I exaggerated details because Vanessa needed support. You make everything feel clinical. Women don't thrive around cold men." Marcus stared at the spreadsheet open on his laptop screen. Mortgage payment due next Tuesday, electric bill processed, hospital copay balance pending, real life sitting in neat columns while someone rewrote it emotionally over the phone. "You changed the story intentionally?" Marcus said quietly. "Yes," Lorraine answered. No hesitation, no apology. "I wanted you to understand how it feels when Vanessa comes second." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. There it was again, not misunderstanding, not emotion, control. Manufactured narrative designed to produce guilt. Upstairs floorboards creaked as Vanessa moved through the bedroom. Lorraine lowered her voice. "You know what your problem is, Marcus." He waited. "You think being dependable is the same thing as being present." The line stayed with him long after the call ended. That night, Marcus sat beside Caleb's crib. In the small nursery they had painted pale blue together months earlier. The baby monitor crackled softly in the darkness. Caleb slept with tiny fists curled near his face. Marcus replayed Lorraine's call through headphones connected to his laptop. Then he saved the file carefully. April 22nd, 2009, _hospital, narrative.wav. Afterward, he opened another folder. Documentation, logs. He began typing dates, comments, witnesses, descriptions, not emotional observations, facts. At 1:07 a.m., Marcus finally stood and walked toward the bedroom. Before turning off the nursery light, he looked once more at Caleb, sleeping peacefully inside the crib. Then Marcus noticed Lorraine standing silently in the hallway outside the partially open door, watching him. Neither spoke. The hallway light behind her cast a long shadow across the carpet between them. The years did not collapse all at once. They eroded, slowly. like water working through concrete until cracks became permanent. By Caleb's 5th birthday, Marcus Washington had learned that Lorraine Bennett rarely attacked directly anymore. She preferred accumulation. Tiny cuts repeated so often, people stopped noticing they were bleeding. The birthday party took place at a public park near Worthington. Marcus spent the entire morning assembling folding tables, carrying coolers and taping blue streamers beneath the shelter roof, while humid August heat settled heavily over Columbus. Caleb ran across the playground wearing a Spider-Man shirt 2 sizes too big. Vanessa laughed with other parents near the grill. Lorraine arrived 40 minutes late, carrying expensive bakery cupcakes from a place in Upper Arlington that charged $6 each. She kissed Caleb dramatically. Then she looked at Marcus balancing hamburger trays beside the grill. "You're sweating through your shirt already," she said lightly. Marcus glanced down. "Hot day." Lorraine smiled toward nearby relatives. Vanessa always said Marcus works harder than he works smarter. Several people laughed politely. Small moment, small cut. Marcus flipped burgers without answering. That became the rhythm of family gatherings, Christmas dinners, school recitals, church picnics. Every event carried tiny comments disguised as humor. Lorraine questioning Marcus's clothes. Lorraine asking if Mid-State Mutual still kept him buried in paperwork. Lorraine comparing other husbands' incomes. Always subtle enough that responding made Marcus appear sensitive. Vanessa rarely defended him anymore. At first, she simply stayed quiet. Later, she started participating. One November evening, Marcus returned home from Dayton after investigating a staged trucking accident involving falsified medical records, 11-hour workday. He walked into the kitchen expecting silence and leftovers. Instead, Vanessa sat at the table reviewing bills. "We need to talk about money," she said immediately. Marcus loosened his tie. "What happened?" "You're too restrictive." Marcus paused. "Restrictive." "Another Lorraine word. I pay the bills." Marcus replied calmly. "That's not what I mean." Vanessa turned her laptop toward him. "There's barely anything left after savings." Marcus looked at the spreadsheet. Mortgage, utilities, retirement contributions, Caleb's school fund, normal expenses. "We're stable," he said. "You act like we're poor. We're careful. That's not the same thing." Marcus opened the refrigerator slowly. Inside sat leftovers he had cooked 2 nights earlier because Vanessa had worked late. "You know what my mother said?" Vanessa continued. Marcus stayed silent. "She said, you budget like someone waiting for a disaster." Marcus closed the refrigerator door carefully. His father used to say the same thing about life after years driving buses through dangerous winter roads. "Prepare before trouble arrives." Marcus looked toward Vanessa. And what do you think? Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than insults. "I think," she said quietly, "sometimes it feels like you're emotionally waiting for things to fail." Marcus stood there in silence. The kitchen clock ticked loudly against the wall. What Vanessa did not understand was that Marcus no longer separated ordinary life from documentation. Every accusation now attached itself automatically to dates and memory. That conversation became another file, another pattern, another piece. The recordings continued through the years, not every day, not obsessively, but consistently. Marcus upgraded equipment twice, transferred files to encrypted drives, created cloud backups under unrelated folder names. At work, he investigated arson, fraud rings, and fake disability claims worth millions. At home, he quietly documented emotional manipulation happening one conversation at a time. The strange part was how ordinary life still looked from outside. Marcus coached Caleb's youth basketball team every spring. He repaired the washing machine himself after watching YouTube tutorials at midnight. He replaced roof shingles after a windstorm instead of hiring contractors. Every morning he packed Caleb's lunches with handwritten notes folded inside napkins. "Good luck on your spelling test. Proud of you?" Love you, Dad. Caleb kept some of them inside his backpack for years. But Lorraine's version of Marcus continued spreading quietly through family circles. Marcus was cold. Marcus was controlling. Marcus did not understand emotional needs. Marcus cared more about systems than people. The irony almost amused him sometimes. Systems were the only reason reality still existed clearly in his mind. By Caleb's 8th birthday, Vanessa had started taking phone calls from Lorraine almost every night before bed. Marcus could predict emotional weather based on call length. 10 minutes meant irritation. 30 minutes meant accusation. An hour meant a fight was coming. One rainy Thursday evening, Marcus sat in the living room helping Caleb build a model airplane while Vanessa spoke with Lorraine upstairs. The boy concentrated carefully while applying decals. Dad, Caleb asked quietly, "Why doesn't Grandma like you?" Marcus looked up slowly. The question arrived without warning. "What makes you think that?" Caleb shrugged. "She talks different when you leave rooms." Marcus held the small plastic airplane wing between his fingers. Children noticed more than adults realized. "What does she say?" Caleb hesitated. "She says you don't understand people." Marcus nodded once. Then he pressed the wing carefully into place. "Your grandmother and I see things differently sometimes." Caleb accepted that answer because he was 8. But Marcus noticed something important that night. Caleb had started observing contradictions too. Upstairs, Vanessa laughed sharply during her phone call. Then silence. Then louder, talking. Marcus already knew what was happening. 10 minutes later, Vanessa came downstairs carrying tension with her like static electricity. "You checked my credit card statement again." Marcus exhaled slowly. "It's a joint account. You question every purchase. I asked about a $900 furniture payment. It was for the house." Marcus looked toward Caleb sitting quietly beside the unfinished airplane. "Not now," Marcus said softly. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You always shut conversations down when accountability comes up." Another Lorraine phrase, accountability. Marcus recognized it instantly. Caleb lowered his eyes toward the table. Marcus felt something tighten inside his chest then. Not anger, fatigue. A deep exhaustion that came from watching language infect a household, year after year. Later that night, after Caleb fell asleep, Marcus sat alone in the garage pretending to organize tools while rain hammered softly against the roof. The digital recorder rested beside him on the workbench. The garage smelled like motor oil and damp concrete. Inside the house, Vanessa's voice carried faintly through the kitchen window while she spoke with Lorraine again. Marcus no longer needed to hear every conversation to understand the pattern. Still, he recorded enough to preserve context, enough to protect chronology, enough to survive later if survival ever required evidence. Around midnight, Vanessa finally went upstairs. Marcus entered the kitchen quietly to get water. That was when he noticed an unfamiliar envelope partially hidden beneath a cookbook near the microwave. Bank statement. Different institution. Not their joint account. Marcus stared at it for several seconds before opening it carefully. The balance showed nearly $38,000. Transfers spread across 14 months, small amounts at a time, hidden carefully. Marcus read every page once, then again. The account holder listed only Vanessa Bennett Washington. No joint access, no discussion, no disclosure. Marcus replaced the statement exactly where he found it. Then he poured himself a glass of water and stood silently at the sink while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Upstairs floorboards creaked as Vanessa moved through the bedroom. Marcus remained motionless. 3 minutes later, his phone vibrated. Lorraine calling Vanessa again, past midnight. Marcus looked toward the dark hallway leading upstairs. Then he slowly set the glass down beside the sink. Marcus Washington did not confront Vanessa about the hidden account. Not that night. Not the next morning either. He still woke at 5:15 a.m. He still ironed his shirts in silence while local news murmured from the television. He still packed Caleb's lunch before school and left a folded note beside the apple slices. Good luck on the science quiz. Love, Dad. Routine protected him from reacting too early. That was another lesson from fraud investigations. Innocent people often panicked. Guilty people usually over-explained. But the strongest cases came from patience. Marcus drove to work through gray November rain while the image of the bank statement replayed quietly in his head. $38,000, 14 months of transfers, carefully hidden. The amount itself did not bother him most. The secrecy did. By lunchtime, Marcus had already begun separating emotion from evidence. At Midstate Mutual Insurance, he spent the afternoon reviewing a suspicious workers' compensation claim involving falsified MRI reports. The claimant had made one critical mistake. He moved money between accounts in predictable patterns. Marcus noticed patterns automatically, always had. That evening after Vanessa left for dinner with Lorraine, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table with his laptop open beside a yellow legal pad. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house felt hollow. He logged into their joint financial accounts carefully. Then he started tracing withdrawals. $500, $800, $2,000. Small enough individually to avoid confrontation, large enough collectively to matter. Marcus wrote dates beside each transfer. Soon another pattern emerged. Most withdrawals happened within 24 hours of long calls with Lorraine. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair, not impulsive spending, coordinated movement. At 9:42 p.m., Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. Marcus closed the laptop before she entered. She walked inside carrying leftovers from a steakhouse in Upper Arlington. "You ate?" she asked casually. Marcus nodded. "How was your mother?" Vanessa shrugged while setting her purse down. "She's worried about me." Marcus looked at her quietly. Why Vanessa hesitated. Then came the line. "Because sometimes you make me feel financially trapped." Marcus felt almost nothing hearing it anymore. Not surprise, recognition. Like hearing a familiar commercial for the 100th time. How he asked calmly, "You monitor spending. We have shared accounts. You question purchases. I ask about major withdrawals." Vanessa crossed her arms. "See that right there." Marcus watched her carefully. The phrasing, the cadence, the emotional escalation, almost identical to earlier recordings. He already knew Lorraine had prepared her before dinner. The question now was how far the preparation went. That night, Marcus waited until Vanessa slept before retrieving the recorder from his office drawer. At 12:16 a.m., the phone rang downstairs. Lorraine. Again. Marcus answered quietly before the second ring. "Hello?" A pause. Then Lorraine sighed. "You really should stop intercepting Vanessa's calls. She's asleep. She's stressed because of you." Marcus pressed record beneath the desk. The familiar red light blinked once. "I'm stressed because my wife hid money," Marcus replied evenly. Silence. 3 seconds. Then Lorraine laughed softly. "There it is. There what is. The control." Marcus stared into darkness beyond the office window. "You advised her to open that account." "I advised my daughter to protect herself." From what? From dependence. Marcus leaned back slowly. "She hid $38,000. "And you think that's normal in a marriage?" Lorraine's tone hardened slightly. "I think women should never rely entirely on men. That's different from deception." "No," Lorraine replied smoothly. "It's preparation." Preparation. Interesting word. Marcus noticed she used it instinctively. "You coached her," he said. "I educated her. You told her to hide money. I told her to secure options before you tighten control further." Marcus almost smiled hearing it. The accusation sounded manufactured now, artificial, like copied language from daytime television therapists. I've never restricted Vanessa financially. You don't need to, Lorraine replied. Men like you create pressure emotionally. Marcus stayed silent. Lorraine continued. Quiet men are dangerous because they make women feel guilty for wanting more. Marcus let several seconds pass. Then he asked the question carefully. What exactly do you think I'm planning to do? Another pause, longer this time. Finally, Lorraine answered. Eventually, you'll use money to corner her. There it was. Not just suspicion anymore. Narrative construction, future accusation groundwork. Marcus ended the call 6 minutes later. Immediately afterward, he replayed the recording twice through headphones. Then he opened a new folder, Financial Manipulation. By 1:04 a.m., the file existed in 3 backup locations. The next morning, Marcus requested a personal day from work. Instead of staying home, he drove downtown to East Broad Street and parked outside Sloan and Kettering Family Law. The office occupied the 8th floor of a modern glass building overlooking Columbus Commons. Marcus sat in the lobby for nearly 12 minutes before approaching reception. He disliked lawyers instinctively. Too much performance in the profession, too much strategic emotion. But he also understood systems, and systems required documentation handled correctly. Rebecca Sloan met him at 10:30, mid-40s, sharp navy suit, minimal jewelry, calm eyes that missed very little. Her office overlooked rainy downtown traffic moving slowly beneath gray skies. What can I help you with, Mr. Washington? Marcus placed a slim folder on her desk. Inside were financial transfer records, account summaries, printed transcripts from 3 recordings, dated behavioral logs. Rebecca read silently for several minutes. Most attorneys Marcus had met talked constantly. Rebecca barely spoke. She highlighted sections occasionally, made short notes, turned pages carefully. Finally, she looked up. How long has this been happening? Years. How long have you documented it? Marcus hesitated briefly. Since year 3 of the marriage. Rebecca leaned back slightly, not shocked, interested. You legally recorded these? Yes. You verified Ohio consent laws first? Yes. Rebecca nodded once. That answer mattered to her. She opened another transcript. Marcus watched her expression change subtly while reading Lorraine's language aloud, under her breath. Financial pressure, emotional safety, control. She closed the folder carefully. I see this pattern more often than people realize, she said. Marcus remained quiet. Rebecca folded her hands together. Long-term narrative conditioning, she continued. One family member slowly reframes reality until the spouse starts interpreting ordinary behavior through suspicion. Marcus looked toward the rain sliding across the office windows. That's exactly what happened. Rebecca studied him another moment. Why haven't you confronted them with the recordings? Marcus answered honestly. Because confrontation without preparation becomes denial. For the first time, Rebecca almost smiled. Yes, she said quietly. Exactly. She stood and walked toward a shelf lined with legal binders. When people manipulate privately for years, she said they become very confident no evidence exists. Marcus listened carefully. That confidence makes them careless eventually. Rebecca returned carrying a yellow legal pad. From this point forward, she said you do 3 things. She raised one finger. Do not threaten divorce first. Second finger. Do not reveal the recordings. Third finger. And do not react emotionally when accusations escalate. Marcus nodded slowly. Rebecca looked directly at him. They think they're building a story, she said. You're building a case. The sentence settled heavily inside the room. Not comforting, strategic. Marcus understood strategy. He had spent years dismantling fraudulent claims created by people who confuse confidence with protection. Before leaving, Rebecca gave him a checklist: preserve original audio files, maintain metadata, document financial activity continuously, avoid retaliatory behavior, assume all communications may become evidence later. Marcus folded the paper carefully into his jacket pocket. Outside downtown Columbus smelled like wet pavement and traffic exhaust. Marcus sat inside his Honda for several minutes before starting the engine. Across the street, office workers hurried through rain, carrying coffee cups and umbrellas. Normal lives, normal marriages. Marcus rested both hands on the steering wheel. Then his phone vibrated. Vanessa. He answered calmly. "Hey, where are you?" she asked. "Work stuff downtown." A pause. "Then my mother thinks you're becoming secretive lately." Marcus stared through the rain-streaked windshield without speaking. Far above the street, thunder rolled faintly across the city. The therapist's office sat on the third floor of a medical building near Grandview Heights. Soft gray walls, artificial plants, a diffuser releasing lavender into the waiting room every 30 seconds. Marcus hated the place immediately, not because of therapy itself, because everything inside the office felt designed to reward emotion over precision. Vanessa chose the counselor after Lorraine recommended her through a church friend, Dr. Melissa Grant, marriage and family therapist. 22 years of experience, according to the framed certificates lining the hallway. The first session began on a Thursday evening in October. Marcus arrived directly from work, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying the exhaustion of a 12-hour investigation involving staged hail damage claims. Vanessa arrived separately after dinner with Lorraine. Marcus noticed her eyes were already red before they even entered the office. Preparation. Dr. Grant welcomed them warmly and gestured toward a beige couch. So she said gently, "What brings you both here?" Vanessa answered first. "Always. First now. I don't feel emotionally safe anymore." Marcus heard the phrase and felt something inside his mind quietly click into place. Exact wording from a recording 2 weeks earlier. Lorraine's voice replayed perfectly in memory. Focus on emotional safety. Therapists react to that. Marcus kept his face neutral. Dr. Grant nodded sympathetically toward Vanessa. "Can you explain what that means to you?" Vanessa looked down at her hands. Marcus noticed another pattern immediately: timing, pauses, controlled breathing before emotional statements. "He makes me feel small," Vanessa said softly. "How he questions everything. Spending, decisions, conversations." Her voice trembled slightly. "Sometimes it feels like I can't breathe around him." Dr. Grant turned toward Marcus. "How do you respond to that?" Marcus folded his hands together calmly. "I ask questions because we share responsibilities." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "See, that's exactly what I mean." Marcus remained silent. At work, fraud interviews often followed identical rhythms. One person framed emotionally, the other responded factually. Observers usually trusted the more emotional speaker first, especially if the factual speaker stayed calm. To many people, calmness looked calculated. The session continued for 53 minutes. Marcus answered carefully. Vanessa cried twice. Dr. Grant assigned communication exercises before they left. In the parking garage afterward, rain echoed softly through concrete levels while Vanessa buckled herself into the passenger seat. "You embarrassed me in there," she said quietly. Marcus stared through the windshield. "How you sounded robotic." Marcus started the engine. I answered honestly. "You answered like a lawyer." Marcus drove home through wet Columbus traffic in silence. Later that night, Vanessa spent 51 minutes on the phone with Lorraine upstairs. Marcus sat in his office wearing headphones, listening, recording. At 11:42 p.m., Lorraine's voice flowed through the speakers calmly. "You cried too late." Vanessa sighed. "I was trying." "No," Lorraine corrected. "You were explaining too much." Marcus wrote the timestamp down automatically. Lorraine continued. Don't debate details with Marcus. He wins when conversations become technical. Vanessa's voice sounded tired. I don't know what to say half the time. Yes, you do. A pause. Then Lorraine lowered her voice slightly. Use emotional language. Marcus leaned closer unconsciously. What do you mean? Vanessa asked. Say things like emotionally unsafe. Say you feel controlled. Say you feel dismissed. Another pause. Those phrases matter. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. There it was again. Not healing, not honesty, strategy. By the third counseling session, Dr. Grant's posture toward Marcus had subtly changed. More cautious, more analytical. She leaned toward Vanessa more often while listening. She interrupted Marcus more frequently. One evening, Dr. Grant asked him directly, Marcus, do you struggle expressing empathy? Marcus considered the question carefully. I don't think so. Vanessa looked frustrated immediately. You don't think so. Marcus turned toward her. I show it differently. How? Marcus hesitated, because his answers never sounded emotionally theatrical enough in rooms like this. I work, he said quietly. I provide stability. I take care of things. Vanessa shook her head. That's not emotional connection. Marcus looked at her silently. 3 nights earlier, he had stayed awake until 2 a.m. fixing Caleb's fever, while Vanessa slept exhausted beside them. 2 weeks earlier, he spent an entire Saturday repairing Vanessa's brakes himself because the mechanic quoted $900. Last month, he drove 3 hours after work to pick up Vanessa when her car broke down outside Dayton. None of those moments seemed to count here because they lacked emotional vocabulary. Dr. Grant scribbled notes. What does emotional intimacy look like to you, Marcus? He searched briefly for words, then failed to find satisfying ones. At work, he dismantled organized fraud schemes worth millions. Inside this office, he felt strangely defenseless. Vanessa spoke again before he answered. He treats problems like spreadsheets. Marcus looked down at his hands. Another Lorraine phrase. He knew it immediately. By session 6, Marcus noticed additional changes outside therapy too. Church friends grew distant. Couples who once invited them to barbecues stopped calling. At Sunday service, conversation shortened when Marcus approached. Someone was talking. Lorraine, most likely. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus and Caleb attended a school fundraiser at a middle school gymnasium in Worthington. Marcus volunteered at the food table, serving hot dogs and bottled water. 2 fathers nearby lowered their voices while watching him. That's him. Yeah, my wife said Vanessa's struggling pretty bad. Marcus pretended not to hear. He kept handing out food tickets calmly while Caleb organized soda cans beside him. The isolation expanded gradually after that, not dramatic. Social, subtle. Exactly Lorraine's preferred method. At home, Vanessa started sleeping in the guest bedroom twice a week after arguments, then 3 nights a week. Eventually, most nights. The house changed emotionally, less warmth, more silence. Yet Marcus still maintained routine, still cooked breakfasts, still attended Caleb's basketball practices, still packed lunches, still documented everything. One February night, Marcus returned from Cleveland after testifying in a fraud prosecution involving staged commercial theft claims. Snow covered the driveway in uneven ridges. Inside the house, only the kitchen light remained on. Vanessa sat at the table crying quietly. For a moment, Marcus almost forgot everything, almost crossed the room immediately. Then he noticed the phone beside her. Lorraine still connected on speaker. Vanessa looked up. You don't even care that I'm hurting anymore. Marcus removed his coat slowly. What happened? Lorraine answered before Vanessa could. That's always your response. Marcus looked at the phone. I wasn't speaking to you. You never speak emotionally, Lorraine replied smoothly. Marcus felt exhaustion spreading through him like concrete hardening. I drove 3 hours home tonight, and Lorraine said, providing transportation isn't intimacy. Vanessa wiped her eyes. You make me feel alone. Marcus stood there silently, because no answer existed anymore that would survive this environment. Every response became evidence against him somehow. If he defended himself, he was dismissive. If he stayed calm, he was cold. If he became emotional, he was unstable. Lorraine had built the framework too carefully over too many years. Marcus finally walked upstairs without arguing. At 1:18 a.m., another recording entered the archive. Inside the call, Lorraine's voice remained patient and instructional. Don't argue facts, she told Vanessa softly. A pause. Then the line Marcus replayed 3 times afterward. Argue feelings. Facts can be defended. Feelings can't. Marcus removed the headphones slowly after the recording ended. Outside his office window, snow drifted quietly across the dark neighborhood. Upstairs, Vanessa cried softly behind the guest bedroom door, and for the first time in years, Marcus began seriously considering the possibility that his marriage might already be dead long before divorce papers ever arrived. Caleb Washington was 16 years old when he started noticing the gaps, not the arguments themselves, the inconsistencies. Teenagers understood contradiction better than adults realized, especially teenagers raised inside tension for years. They learned emotional weather patterns the same way sailors learned storms. Caleb knew when Vanessa would come downstairs angry after speaking to Lorraine. He knew when Marcus would stay quiet to avoid escalation. He knew which nights ended with doors closing softly instead of shouting. And he knew one thing that increasingly bothered him. His father never acted like the monster people described. One Friday evening in late October, Marcus stood in the driveway, replacing the brake pads on Caleb's first car, a faded silver 2008 Toyota Camry bought from a retired postal worker in Reynoldsburg. Cold wind pushed dead leaves across the concrete, while country music played softly from Marcus's portable radio. Caleb crouched beside him holding a flashlight. You tighten it evenly, Marcus said calmly. Not all the way on one side first. Caleb nodded. Marcus handed him the wrench. Simple moment. Normal. The kind Lorraine never seemed able to acknowledge existed. Inside the house, Vanessa and Lorraine talked loudly in the kitchen through the open window. Their voices drifted outside between gusts of wind. Caleb paused while tightening a lug nut. They're talking about you again, he muttered. Marcus continued working without looking up. What are they saying? Caleb hesitated. That you manipulate people. Marcus wiped grease from his hands with an old towel. Do you think I manipulate people? Caleb frowned immediately. No. The answer came too fast to be polite. Too honest. Marcus glanced toward him briefly. Then that's enough. But it wasn't enough anymore. Not for Caleb. At 16, he had already lived through nearly a decade of strange emotional contradictions. Grandma Lorraine said Marcus was cold. Yet Marcus never missed basketball games. Grandma Lorraine said Marcus didn't care about family. Yet Marcus woke at 5 every morning and worked 12-hour days while still helping with homework at night. Grandma Lorraine said Marcus controlled everything. Yet Marcus almost never raised his voice during arguments. The pieces no longer fit together cleanly. Later that night, Caleb walked downstairs around midnight looking for water. The house was dark except for light beneath Marcus's office door. Caleb knocked lightly. You awake? Marcus looked up from his laptop. Yeah. Inside, the office folders covered the desk in neat stacks. Insurance reports, financial documents, printed spreadsheets. Caleb stepped inside holding a glass. You working? Marcus nodded once, always. Caleb leaned against the doorway. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Caleb finally asked, Why don't you ever defend yourself? Marcus looked at him quietly. The question landed harder than Caleb realized. Against what, Grandma? Mom sometimes, everybody. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair. Outside, rain tapped softly against the office window. She says weird stuff about you, Caleb continued, and you just sit there. Marcus studied his son carefully. 16 now, broader shoulders, voice deepening, old enough to notice manipulation but still young enough to feel trapped by it. What would defending myself accomplish? Marcus asked. Caleb frowned. The truth, Marcus almost smiled at that. The truth doesn't matter much if people already decided how they feel. Caleb looked confused. Marcus understood that confusion. At 16, he still believed honesty naturally corrected lies. Life had taught Marcus otherwise. Then why stay? Caleb asked quietly. Marcus looked down at the paperwork on his desk. Because of you, he thought immediately, but he didn't say it aloud. Instead, he answered carefully. Because leaving too early sometimes gives people exactly the story they want. Caleb stood silent for a moment. Then his eyes shifted toward a locked black cabinet beside the desk. What's in there? Marcus's expression didn't change. Work stuff. Technically true. Just not the kind of work Caleb imagined. The next month, the custody conversations began. Not officially, strategically. Marcus first heard them through another late-night recording. It happened after Thanksgiving dinner at Lorraine's house. The evening itself had been exhausting from the beginning. Lorraine spent most of dinner praising another family's son-in-law who recently became a partner at a law firm in Cincinnati. Vanessa drank more wine than usual. Caleb stayed mostly quiet. Marcus carved turkey and washed dishes afterward without complaint. At one point, Lorraine casually asked Caleb whether he preferred staying at Grandma's house because things felt calmer there. Marcus noticed the question immediately. Testing language, planting preferences, building future testimony slowly. That night, after everyone returned home, Marcus sat alone in his office while Vanessa showered upstairs. At 11:26 p.m., Lorraine called. Marcus recorded automatically now. The conversation began normally enough. Then Lorraine lowered her voice. You need to think ahead. Vanessa sounded exhausted. I am thinking ahead, no, Lorraine replied. Emotionally ahead. Marcus leaned slightly closer to the speaker. What does that mean? Vanessa asked. It means Caleb is old enough now to understand instability. Marcus wrote the timestamp down immediately. You should start documenting how Marcus behaves around him. Vanessa hesitated. He's never hurt Caleb. That's not what courts care about anymore, Lorraine said smoothly. They care about emotional environment. Marcus felt coldness spread slowly through his chest. Not fear, recognition. Lorraine continued calmly. If divorce happens eventually, you don't want Caleb completely influenced by Marcus. Divorce. There it was. No longer implied. Strategic. Active. Vanessa sounded uncertain now. I don't want Caleb dragged into this. He already is, Lorraine answered. And trust me, judges notice which parent creates emotional safety. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Same phrase again. Emotional safety. Years of repetition turning manufactured language into permanent framework. Upstairs floorboards creaked as Vanessa crossed the bedroom. The call continued. You should reduce how much alone time Marcus gets with Caleb, Lorraine said. Gradually. Marcus opened his eyes again slowly. Mom, I'm serious. That feels extreme. No, Lorraine replied. It feels prepared. Prepared. Always preparation. Always positioning. Never healing. Marcus replayed that section 4 separate times after the call ended. Then he saved the recording into a new folder. Custody Positioning. The title itself made his stomach tighten. 3 days later, Caleb came home from school unusually quiet. Marcus found him sitting alone on the back porch after dinner, despite freezing temperatures. You okay? Marcus asked. Caleb shrugged without looking up. Marcus sat beside him. The porch wood creaked softly under their weight. Finally, Caleb spoke. Grandma asked if I'd rather live with Mom. Marcus kept his expression neutral. What did you say? That it was a weird question. Marcus nodded once. Streetlights reflected faintly off wet pavement across the neighborhood. Caleb looked toward him carefully. Are you guys getting divorced? Marcus stayed silent longer this time. Long enough that Caleb already understood the answer. We're having problems, Marcus said finally. Caleb laughed bitterly under his breath. No kidding. Marcus looked at him. Teenagers usually hid emotion behind sarcasm. Marcus recognized the hurt underneath immediately. You know what's messed up, Caleb said quietly. Everybody keeps talking like you're dangerous or something. Marcus said nothing. Mom cries all the time after talking to Grandma. Caleb continued. But when it's just us here, nothing happens. The sentence hung heavily between them. Marcus looked out toward the dark street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Then Caleb asked the question again, this time more directly. Why do you let people say these things about you? Marcus rested his elbows on his knees slowly. Because one day they'll say too much, he thought. Because lies eventually become patterns. Because patterns become evidence. But he could not explain that yet. Not to his son. Instead, Marcus stood quietly and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Come inside, he said softly. It's getting cold. And upstairs through the kitchen window, glowing warm against the darkness, Marcus could already see Vanessa standing with her phone pressed against her ear once again. Marcus Washington received the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning at 10:14 a.m. He was standing in Conference Room B at Midstate Mutual Insurance reviewing drone photographs from a suspected commercial arson case near Akron when the receptionist knocked softly on the glass door. Marcus, she said carefully, there's someone asking for you downstairs. Marcus looked up from the projector screen. The receptionist's expression told him immediately what it was. Not surprise, discomfort. He walked downstairs slowly through rows of gray cubicles, while conversations lowered around him in small waves. Midstate's Columbus regional office occupied 3 floors downtown, and by then Marcus had worked there almost 15 years. People respected him, not because he was charismatic, because he was precise. Marcus solved problems quietly, never missed deadlines, never dramatized cases. Younger investigators often brought files to him before presenting conclusions because Marcus noticed inconsistencies nobody else saw. That reputation followed him into the lobby. The process server stood near the reception desk holding a yellow envelope. Marcus Washington. Marcus nodded once. You've been served. No scene, no shouting, just paper-changing hands beneath fluorescent lights. Marcus signed calmly. The server left. Behind the reception counter, 2 employees pretended to focus on computer monitors while listening carefully. Marcus opened the envelope immediately. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Franklin County Domestic Relations Court. Petitioner, Vanessa Renee Washington. He read the first 3 pages standing in the lobby. Then the allegations started. Emotionally controlling behavior. Financial intimidation, psychological manipulation, unstable home environment. Marcus read every line without visible reaction. Inside, however, something settled heavily into place. Not shock, confirmation. The framework Lorraine spent nearly 2 decades building had finally become official. Marcus folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. Then he returned upstairs to Conference Room B and continued the arson presentation exactly where he left off. Nobody interrupted him, but everyone noticed. At 12:37 p.m., Marcus sat alone inside his Honda Accord parked beside the Scioto River and called Rebecca Sloan. She filed. Rebecca asked immediately after hearing his voice. Yes, you were served today 10 minutes ago. Rebecca exhaled softly. What are the allegations? Marcus looked down at the paperwork resting on the passenger seat. emotional abuse, financial control, manipulation. Rebecca was quiet for several seconds. Then, exactly what we expected. Marcus stared through the windshield at gray water moving slowly beyond the parking lot barrier. "Are you ready?" Rebecca asked. Marcus thought about the black cabinet inside his office at home, the recordings, the transcripts. 16 years of chronology. "Yes," he answered quietly. That evening, Marcus drove home through rush hour traffic with unusual calmness, almost relief, because uncertainty had finally ended. War felt cleaner once openly declared. The house was quiet when he arrived. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table holding tea with both hands. She looked exhausted, not triumphant. Marcus placed the envelope gently on the counter between them. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Vanessa looked up. "You got served at work." "Yes, I didn't want it to happen there." Marcus removed his coat slowly, but it did. Vanessa swallowed hard. "I couldn't do this anymore." Marcus studied her face carefully. The fatigue beneath her eyes, the nervous tapping of her fingers against the mug, the tension every time silence lasted too long. 18 years together, and he could still read her emotional rhythms instinctively. "What exactly couldn't you do anymore?" he asked. Vanessa looked away immediately. That tone right there. Marcus almost smiled. Still happening, still automatic, even now. "You already decided what I am," he said quietly. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Vanessa stood abruptly and crossed her arms. "You make people feel trapped, Marcus." Another Lorraine phrase, same wording from recordings nearly 8 years earlier. Marcus recognized it instantly. Upstairs, Caleb's bedroom door opened slightly. He was home, listening. Marcus lowered his voice. "Does your mother know I was served today?" Vanessa hesitated too long. That answered the question. "She's worried about me," Vanessa said finally. Marcus nodded once. Of course she was. Lorraine had waited years for this moment. That night, Marcus slept in the basement for the first time officially. Not after a fight, not temporarily, permanently. The basement smelled faintly like detergent and concrete dust. Marcus set up an old lamp beside the couch and unpacked 2 duffel bags quietly, while rain tapped against the narrow ground-level windows. At 11:08 p.m., his phone vibrated. "Rebecca, you need to start assuming every interaction matters now," she said immediately. "Texts, calls, facial expressions, everything." Marcus sat at the folding table beside his laptop. "I know." "Good. Also, don't leave the house voluntarily unless advised." Marcus rubbed his forehead slowly. "What about Caleb?" "That's exactly why you stay calm," Rebecca replied. "The moment you react emotionally, their narrative gains credibility." Marcus looked toward the basement stairs. Above him, faint footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. Vanessa moving. "Probably talking to Lorraine already." "They'll escalate," Rebecca continued. "People who build emotional cases usually overplay them eventually." Marcus leaned back in the chair. "I have the recordings." "Yes," Rebecca said calmly, "and they have no idea." That mattered most, because surprise changed legal outcomes. People lied more confidently when they believed evidence did not exist. After the call ended, Marcus walked toward the black cabinet beneath the basement stairs. He unlocked it carefully. Inside sat 16 years of preparation. External drives labeled by year, printed transcripts organized chronologically, bank records, call logs, email screenshots, behavioral documentation, thousands of pages total. Marcus removed one drive and connected it to his laptop. Folders filled the screen. Year 3, Year 4, Year 5, all the way through Year 18. He opened several recordings randomly. Lorraine coaching emotional language, Lorraine discussing custody positioning, Lorraine instructing Vanessa to create financial separation quietly. Marcus listened without expression, because by then, The recordings no longer hurt emotionally. They functioned like evidence from any other investigation. At 12:42 a.m., someone knocked softly on the basement doorframe. Caleb. Marcus removed his headphones immediately. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Caleb looked shaken. "Mom said you're getting divorced." Marcus nodded once. "Looks that way." Caleb stepped farther into the basement slowly. The room suddenly looked very small around them. Storage boxes, laundry shelves, one couch, one lamp. His father reduced to temporary space inside his own house. "She said you've been emotionally hurting her for years," Caleb said quietly. Marcus studied his son carefully. "What do you think?" Caleb looked down at the floor. "I think everybody says stuff about you that doesn't match what I see." Marcus felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. Not because Caleb defended him, because the boy sounded exhausted, too young for this level of emotional pressure. Upstairs floorboards creaked again. Vanessa pacing, probably on another late-night call. Caleb looked around the basement. "You really staying down here for now?" "That's messed up." Marcus almost smiled faintly. "Life gets messy sometimes." Caleb shoved both hands into his hoodie pockets. Then his eyes landed on the black cabinet. "What's all that?" Marcus followed his gaze. "Records." What kind of records? Marcus hesitated. Long enough that Caleb noticed. Before Marcus could answer, his phone vibrated again. "Unknown number." Marcus answered cautiously. Hello silence at first. Then Lorraine Bennett's voice arrived smooth and calm through the speaker. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose things are finally moving forward." Marcus looked toward the basement ceiling while Caleb stood frozen nearby. And for the first time since the divorce papers arrived, Marcus realized Lorraine no longer sounded careful at all. She sounded victorious. Lorraine Bennett made her first major mistake 3 weeks after the divorce filing. Until then, she had operated carefully, indirectly, always through implication. But success changed people, especially people who spent years believing they controlled every conversation in the room. Marcus recognized the pattern immediately because he had seen it in fraud investigations dozens of times before. Most schemes collapsed after confidence replaced caution. The morning after Lorraine's late-night phone call, Marcus woke at 5:15 a.m. in the basement and followed the same routine he had followed for nearly 20 years. Coffee, shower, ironed shirt, packed lunch. The basement couch left a dull ache in his lower back, but Marcus never mentioned it. Upstairs, the house remained silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Vanessa avoided looking at him directly now. Caleb watched both parents carefully during breakfast, like someone monitoring unstable chemicals. Marcus noticed that too. Children learn tension faster than adults realized. At 7:03 a.m., Vanessa finally spoke. "My attorney thinks we should sell the house." Marcus spread peanut butter across toast evenly before answering. "The mortgage is current." "That's not the point." Marcus looked up slowly. "What's the point?" Vanessa hesitated. Then came another familiar phrase. "This environment isn't emotionally healthy." Marcus almost heard Lorraine's voice layered beneath hers. Same cadence, same framing. Caleb lowered his eyes toward his cereal bowl. Marcus answered calmly, "I'm not discussing legal strategy at breakfast." Vanessa's jaw tightened immediately. "You always shut down conversations." Marcus remained silent, because Rebecca Sloan had predicted this stage already. Escalation, increased emotional pressure designed to provoke reaction. Marcus grabbed his keys and left for work without another word. Rain covered downtown Columbus in gray reflections by the time he reached Midstate Mutual Insurance. At 9:18 a.m., Harold Whitmore called Marcus into his office. Harold had spent 30 years in insurance claims management and looked permanently exhausted by humanity. Thick reading glasses, rolled sleeves, coffee stains on half the files covering his desk. He closed the office door quietly after Marcus entered. "We received a complaint," Harold said. Marcus sat down slowly. "What kind of complaint?" Harold adjusted his glasses. "Anonymous." Of course. Marcus already knew where this was going. Harold slid a printed email across the desk. The complaint accused Marcus of intimidation toward female coworkers, emotionally aggressive conduct, unstable behavior during investigations. Marcus read every line carefully. No specific incidents, no dates, no names, just emotional framing. Harold watched him closely. "You know anything about this?" Marcus placed the paper down gently. "Yes." Harold raised an eyebrow. "My divorce started 3 weeks ago." Understanding appeared immediately across Harold's face. "Ah." Marcus nodded once. Harold leaned back in his chair. "I've known you 15 years, Marcus." Silence filled the office briefly. Then Harold added quietly, "You're one of the calmest investigators in this building." Marcus appreciated the statement more than he showed. Still, Harold continued, "HR has to document complaints formally." Marcus nodded again. "Understood." Harold studied him another moment. "You want advice?" Marcus waited. "Don't react emotionally." That's probably what somebody wants. Marcus almost smiled faintly. Too late for that strategy to surprise him. After leaving Harold's office, Marcus walked directly to his car inside the parking garage and called Rebecca. "They contacted your employer already?" she asked sharply. "Yes, that's faster than expected." Marcus stared across rows of parked vehicles. No direct accusations, just emotional language. Rebecca exhaled slowly. "That actually helps us." "How?" "Because vague accusations without supporting events look strategic over time." Marcus leaned against the steering wheel. Then another thought surfaced. Timing. He checked his call logs immediately. The anonymous complaint reached HR 42 minutes after Vanessa spent 90 minutes at Lorraine's house 2 nights earlier. Pattern again. That evening, Marcus sat in Rebecca Sloane's office while rain hammered against downtown windows. Rebecca reviewed the employer complaint beside a growing stack of evidence binders. "You know what this is?" she asked. Marcus answered immediately. "Positioning." Rebecca nodded. "They're expanding narrative pressure beyond the marriage now." Marcus looked toward the binders. 16 years reduced into organized chronology. "She's getting careless," Rebecca said quietly. Marcus understood she meant Lorraine. "She thinks emotional momentum protects her." Rebecca opened another folder. "We're filing subpoenas." Marcus remained silent. Phone records, bank transfers, communication timelines. Everything Lorraine assumed remained invisible. Rebecca tapped her pen lightly against the desk. Eventually she said, "People like this make one mistake." "What kind?" "They stop hiding intent." 3 days later, Lorraine made exactly that mistake. It happened on a Sunday afternoon after church. Vanessa left with Caleb to visit a college fair at Ohio State University, while Marcus stayed home repairing loose siding damaged during a windstorm. At 2:11 p.m., his phone vibrated. Lorraine. Marcus stood alone in the garage, holding a cordless drill. Without hesitation, he answered and activated recording. "What do you want?" Lorraine. Her voice sounded unusually relaxed. "I heard about the HR complaint." Marcus said nothing. "I hope that taught you something." The garage suddenly felt very quiet around him. Marcus placed the drill slowly onto the workbench. "What exactly was I supposed to learn? That reputation matters." Marcus leaned against the workbench calmly. "You filed the complaint?" Lorraine laughed softly. "You can't prove that." Interesting response, not denial. Marcus noticed immediately. "You're trying to damage my employment during divorce proceedings," he said evenly. "No," Lorraine replied. "I'm trying to protect my daughter from a man who hides behind professionalism." Marcus listened carefully. Years earlier, Lorraine would have avoided direct statements. Now she sounded comfortable, victorious. You know what your problem is, Lorraine continued. You think documents make you trustworthy. Marcus remained silent. But courts care about emotional patterns, now, she said, not just paperwork. There it was again, courts, strategy, narrative. Marcus let her continue uninterrupted. You built this cold little image your whole life, Lorraine said, reliable, responsible, quiet. Her tone sharpened slightly, but eventually people see what's underneath. Marcus stared at rainwater dripping beneath the garage door. And what's underneath? A controlling man who needs power to feel secure. Marcus heard footsteps overhead inside the house, probably neighbors outside. He lowered his voice. You've spent 18 years trying to make people believe that. Lorraine paused briefly. Then came the sentence that changed everything. No, she said softly. I spent 18 years making sure Vanessa would leave you before you destroyed her completely. Marcus closed his eyes once, not from pain, from recognition. Intent finally spoken aloud, cleanly, directly, no ambiguity. The silence stretched between them. Then Lorraine continued speaking. Too much now, too confidently. You should have divorced her years ago if you had any dignity, she said. Instead, you sat there collecting resentment like a little accountant. Marcus's grip tightened around the phone. Still calm, always calm. You think you're smarter than everybody because you stay quiet, Lorraine continued, but quiet men break families slowly. Marcus listened, every word recording cleanly into permanent evidence. Then Lorraine made the fatal mistake. You're going to lose that house, she said, and once Vanessa gets primary custody, Caleb won't want much to do with you anyway. Marcus opened his eyes slowly. There it was, not concern, objective, planned outcome. The conversation lasted another 6 minutes. Marcus barely spoke. Lorraine filled silence willingly now. When the call finally ended, Marcus stood motionless inside the garage while rain echoed softly overhead. Then he replayed the recording immediately, twice. At 3:08 p.m., Marcus sat inside Rebecca Sloane's office again. The audio played through conference room speakers. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When the call ended, she leaned back slowly in her chair. For the first time since meeting Marcus, Rebecca smiled openly, not happily, professionally. That, she said quietly, is the strongest evidence we have so far. Marcus looked at the paused waveform frozen across the laptop screen. Lorraine's voice captured permanently in digital blue lines. She admitted intent, Rebecca continued. Interference, narrative shaping, custody positioning. Marcus nodded once. Outside the office window downtown, Columbus traffic crawled through cold evening rain. Rebecca closed the laptop carefully. They've spent years building emotional smoke, she said. Now we start introducing fire alarms. And across town, completely unaware of the damage she had just caused herself, Lorraine Bennett was still calling relatives to discuss how confidently the divorce was progressing. The deposition took place on a gray Thursday morning in April, inside the conference suite of Sloan and Kettering Family Law. Downtown Columbus sat beneath steady rain that turned every window into blurred silver glass. Marcus arrived at 8:12 a.m., wearing a dark navy suit and carrying nothing except a slim leather folder. The black evidence case stayed locked inside Rebecca Sloane's office, waiting. Marcus stepped off the elevator and immediately saw Lorraine Bennett standing near reception beside Vanessa and their attorney, Richard Feldman. Lorraine looked immaculate, cream-colored blazer, pearl earrings, perfect posture, the appearance of a respected retired educator who volunteered at church fundraisers and sent handwritten birthday cards. Exactly the image she spent years building. Vanessa looked different, thinner, tired around the eyes. She avoided looking directly at Marcus when he entered. Richard Feldman approached first with professional politeness. Mr. Washington. Marcus shook his hand once. No hostility, no performance. Rebecca emerged from the conference room moments later carrying two binders pressed against her chest. Let's begin. The deposition room felt aggressively neutral. Long walnut table, pitcher of water. Legal pads arranged neatly beneath fluorescent lights. A court reporter sat quietly near the wall, preparing the equipment, while rain tapped softly against distant windows. Marcus took his seat beside Rebecca. Across from him, Lorraine folded her hands elegantly atop the table, composed, confident. That confidence mattered. Rebecca noticed it too. The deposition began routinely. Names, addresses, employment history. Then the questioning narrowed. Mrs. Bennett Rebecca said calmly, "Would you describe your relationship with your daughter Vanessa as close?" "Very close." "And your relationship with Marcus Washington Lorraine?" Offered a sad smile. "I tried very hard over the years." Marcus almost admired the delivery. Measured disappointment, maternal concern. "Nothing aggressive." Rebecca nodded lightly. "Did you regularly discuss Marcus with Vanessa during the marriage occasionally?" "Like any mother would." "Did you ever encourage Vanessa to divorce Marcus?" "Absolutely not." No hesitation. Marcus watched Lorraine carefully. The same smooth certainty she used in every social setting. Rebecca turned a page. "Did you ever advise Vanessa regarding custody strategy involving Caleb Washington?" Richard Feldman immediately looked up. "Objection to form." Rebecca nodded slightly. Lorraine answered anyway. "No." Still smooth. Still confident. Rebecca continued. "Did you ever describe Marcus as emotionally unsafe?" Lorraine sighed softly. "I may have expressed concern privately." "Concern based on what behavior specifically?" Lorraine paused. "Barely noticeable. He could be emotionally cold. Can you provide examples?" Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus recognized the shift immediately. Vague accusations struggled under direct structure. Lorraine adjusted her bracelet. "It's difficult to explain unless you lived with it." Rebecca wrote something briefly on her legal pad. Then she looked up calmly. "Mrs. Bennett, have you ever attempted to influence how Vanessa described Marcus during therapy sessions?" "No." The answer arrived too quickly. Rebecca nodded once. Then she reached into her briefcase. Marcus felt the room's atmosphere change instantly, not dramatically. Subtly, like pressure dropping before a storm. Rebecca connected a small speaker to her laptop. Richard Feldman frowned slightly. Lorraine remained composed. Mrs. Bennett Rebecca said quietly, "I'm going to play a short audio clip." Lorraine blinked once. Still calm. Rebecca pressed play. Static crackled briefly. Then Lorraine's own voice filled the room. "She needs to cry earlier in the session. Focus on emotional safety. Therapists react to that." Silence hit the room immediately afterward. Heavy. Physical. Lorraine's face changed almost imperceptibly. Not panic. Recognition. Marcus watched her eyes sharpen as realization spread. Rebecca let the silence remain untouched for several seconds. Then, "Is that your voice?" Mrs. Bennett Lorraine swallowed once. "It sounds edited." Marcus almost looked away at that moment. Not from sympathy, from familiarity. Fraud suspects often reacted the same way during first evidence exposure. Deny authenticity before processing implications. Rebecca remained calm. "The recording has already been forensically preserved and authenticated," she said. "Would you like me to repeat the question?" Richard Feldman leaned forward immediately. "We'd like copies of any alleged recordings before further comment." "You received disclosure notice last week," Rebecca replied evenly. Feldman's expression tightened slightly. That meant he had not fully reviewed everything yet. Interesting. Rebecca clicked another file open. "Mrs. Bennett?" She continued, "Did you ever encourage Vanessa to use specific emotional terminology during therapy?" Lorraine straightened in her chair. "No." Rebecca pressed play again. "Don't argue facts. Argue feelings. Facts can be defended. Feelings can't." Vanessa visibly flinched this time. Marcus noticed immediately. Not just embarrassment, recognition, like hearing private memories replayed from outside herself. The court reporter stopped typing briefly before resuming. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Rebecca's voice remained perfectly controlled. Still denying involvement, Lorraine crossed her arms now. For the first time all morning, she looked defensive. "You don't understand context." Rebecca nodded. "Then explain the context." Lorraine glanced toward Vanessa instinctively. Small mistake, Marcus saw it. Rebecca saw it too. "She was hurting," Lorraine said carefully. "I was helping my daughter communicate by scripting emotional terminology." "That's unfair." Rebecca ignored the statement completely. Another audio file loaded. Marcus recognized it immediately from the timestamp. The custody recording. "You should reduce how much alone time Marcus gets with Caleb." Gradually. This time the silence afterward lasted longer. Much longer. Vanessa stared downward at the table. Richard Feldman removed his glasses slowly. Lorraine's jaw tightened visibly. Rebecca folded her hands together. "Mrs. Bennett?" She asked quietly, "Why were you discussing custody positioning?" Before divorce proceedings officially began, Lorraine finally lost some composure. "I was protecting my grandson." "From what specifically he creates emotional instability, documented where he manipulates quietly." Rebecca tilted her head slightly. "Can you identify a single incident?" Lorraine opened her mouth, stopped, tried again. Nothing concrete arrived. Because there never had been anything concrete, only years of emotional framing repeated often enough to feel true. Rebecca waited calmly. Marcus remained motionless beside her. Then Rebecca delivered the next blow. "Mrs. Bennett," she said softly, "we currently possess approximately 16 years of recordings." Lorraine turned toward Marcus sharply for the first time, real shock finally appearing. Marcus met her eyes calmly. No anger, no satisfaction, just stillness. Rebecca continued speaking while opening another box beside the table. Inside sat transcript binders, dozens of them, chronologically labeled, year 3, year 4, year 5, all the way through year 18. One by one, Rebecca stacked them onto the conference table. The sound echoed heavily through the room. Thud, thud, thud. 42 binders total. Vanessa stared at them like physical evidence from another life. Richard Feldman's face drained slowly of confidence, and Lorraine finally looked uncertain. Not guilty yet, not defeated, but shaken. Because for 18 years she believed conversations disappeared after speaking them. Now every sentence existed permanently. Rebecca opened one binder carefully. "Page 214, she said calmly. "Would you like me to read your comments regarding financial manipulation strategy next?" Lorraine looked toward Vanessa again. Vanessa did not look back. That detail mattered more than anything else Marcus had seen all morning. The emotional alignment between mother and daughter had fractured slightly, just enough. Rebecca closed the binder softly. "We'll break for 10 minutes. Everyone stood slowly. The court reporter exited first. Richard Feldman immediately pulled Vanessa aside near the windows for urgent discussion. Lorraine remained seated alone for several seconds. Marcus gathered papers quietly beside Rebecca. Then Lorraine finally looked directly at him. "How long?" she asked softly. Marcus adjusted his cuff without expression. "Long enough." Lorraine stared at him in disbelief, not because he recorded her, because he stayed silent while doing it. And across the conference room, Vanessa was still staring at the mountain of transcript binders, like someone realizing the past 18 years might not belong entirely to the version of reality she had been taught to believe. Vanessa Washington listened to the recordings for 6 straight hours across 2 days. By the end of the second day, she stopped trying to defend most of them. The first session took place inside Rebecca Sloan's conference room the Monday after the deposition. Outside downtown Columbus moved through cold spring rain while traffic lights reflected red and yellow across wet pavement below the windows. Inside, nobody raised their voice. That was the strange part. Marcus expected anger, denial, maybe screaming. Instead, the room felt exhausted. Vanessa sat at the far end of the table wearing a gray sweater and holding a paper coffee cup she barely touched. Her attorney, Richard Feldman, remained unusually quiet while Rebecca organized audio files beside her laptop. Lorraine was not present. That mattered. For perhaps the first time in 18 years, Vanessa had no immediate emotional translator beside her. Rebecca clicked play. Lorraine's voice filled the speakers calmly. You need to stop letting Marcus redirect conversations toward facts. Vanessa closed her eyes immediately. The recording continued. When men stay too calm, therapists trust them automatically. You have to describe emotional pressure instead. Marcus watched Vanessa carefully, not triumphantly, just observantly. The same way he observed claimants during fraud interviews when reality first interrupted rehearsed stories. People rarely reacted dramatically at first. Confusion came before collapse. Rebecca stopped the recording. Would you like another example? She asked gently. Vanessa rubbed both hands against the coffee cup. That could mean anything. Rebecca nodded once, then played another. Don't argue facts, argue feelings. Facts can be defended, feelings can't. This time Vanessa looked physically uncomfortable. Marcus recognized the expression immediately. Memory conflict. The human mind hated discovering outside influence attached to deeply emotional moments. Vanessa swallowed hard. She was trying to help me communicate. Rebecca did not argue. Instead, she opened a transcript binder. Page 418, she said calmly. This call happened 2 hours before your therapy session on March 12th. She slid the binder toward Vanessa. Highlighted phrases covered the page. Emotionally unsafe financial pressure. Silent intimidation. Rebecca flipped another page, then another. The exact same phrases later appeared in Dr. Grant's therapy notes. Word for word. Vanessa stared at the pages without speaking. Marcus remained silent too, not because he lacked emotion, because Rebecca warned him already. Do not comfort her while evidence unfolds. Confusion must settle naturally. So Marcus sat quietly with both hands folded, while 18 years slowly rearranged themselves inside his wife's mind. Around noon, Rebecca paused playback. We can stop here for today if needed. Vanessa shook her head immediately. No. The answer surprised everyone slightly, even Marcus. Vanessa looked toward him briefly for the first time all morning. How long have you had these? Marcus answered honestly. Since year 3. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You recorded my mother for 15 years, 16. The correction landed heavily. Vanessa leaned back slowly in her chair. You just listened. Marcus thought carefully before answering. No, he said quietly. I documented. Richard Feldman finally spoke. Why not confront anyone earlier? Marcus looked toward the rain-covered windows. Because every confrontation became another story about my behavior. Silence followed. Not argumentative silence. Thinking silence. Rebecca resumed playback. This recording came from 7 years earlier. Lorraine's voice sounded sharp and irritated. You need separate savings before Marcus starts tightening control financially. Vanessa frowned immediately. That account was my idea. Rebecca pressed another button. Earlier section of the same call played. Open it quietly, Lorraine instructed. Men like Marcus panic when women gain independence. Vanessa's face changed again. Small shift, but Marcus noticed it. The beginning of separation between memory and influence. By late afternoon, Vanessa looked emotionally drained, not destroyed, unsteady. At 4:17 p.m., Rebecca played the hospital recording from Caleb's birth. Lorraine's voice echoed softly through the speakers. I exaggerated details because Vanessa needed support. Vanessa covered her mouth immediately. Marcus looked down at the table. That recording still affected him too. Not because of anger anymore, because it marked the moment he realized narrative mattered more to Lorraine than reality itself. Vanessa stared at the speaker. She admitted that Marcus nodded once. Rebecca closed the laptop. We'll continue tomorrow. Nobody argued. That night, Marcus drove home separately through light rain, while downtown office buildings faded behind him in blurred reflections. The house felt strange now, fragile, like everyone inside understood something irreversible had started. Caleb sat at the kitchen counter eating leftover pasta when Marcus entered. How'd it go? He asked carefully. Marcus loosened his tie slowly. Long day. Caleb studied him. She heard the recordings. Yes. Caleb hesitated. Did Grandma know you had all that number? A faint, almost stunned laugh escaped Caleb. That's insane. Marcus poured himself water at the sink. Upstairs, Vanessa remained inside the bedroom with the door closed. No phone calls with Lorraine that night. Marcus noticed immediately. At 11:08 p.m., he sat alone in the basement office reviewing additional transcript files when soft footsteps approached. Vanessa stood in the doorway. She looked exhausted, not angry anymore, just hollowed out. Marcus removed his reading glasses slowly. What do you need? Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. You really recorded everything, not everything. How did you even live like that? Marcus considered the question carefully, then answered honestly. I adapted. Vanessa looked around the basement office. The organized files, labeled drives, chronological binders. You built an entire case against my mother. Marcus shook his head once. No. He looked directly at her then. I built protection for myself. That answer hit harder than accusation would have. Vanessa lowered herself slowly into the chair across from him. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, she asked quietly, Did you hate me? Marcus blinked once. No. Vanessa's eyes reddened immediately. Then why didn't you tell me? Marcus leaned back slowly. Because every time I challenged something, you believed her more. Vanessa looked away. The worst part was she knew that was true. Marcus continued carefully. You remember Cleveland? Vanessa frowned faintly. The hotel fight. Yes. Her expression tightened. You screamed at me for checking your spending. Marcus shook his head slowly. You screamed at me because your mother spent 2 hours convincing you I was monitoring your independence. Vanessa opened her mouth, stopped. Memory shifting again. Marcus watched it happen in real time. Tiny uncertainty entering old emotional certainty. There are dozens like that, he said quietly. Vanessa rubbed both hands over her face. This doesn't make sense. It does, Marcus replied calmly. You were conditioned slowly. The word conditioned visibly hurt her, but Marcus refused to soften it, because soft language created confusion again. Vanessa looked toward the cabinet holding the drives. How many recordings are there? Marcus answered without emotion. 387. Silence. The basement suddenly sounded very quiet except for distant rain against the narrow windows. Vanessa shook her head slowly. My God. Marcus watched her carefully, not with satisfaction, mostly sadness, because despite everything, he still remembered the woman she used to be before Lorraine's influence became constant background noise inside their marriage. Vanessa finally looked back at him. How long were you preparing for this? Marcus thought about that. The recordings, the folders, the years of staying calm while his reputation eroded piece by piece. Then he answered with complete honesty. Since the moment I realized nobody would believe me, without proof. Vanessa stared at him silently while somewhere upstairs for the first night in years, the house remained completely free of Lorraine Bennett's voice. KT Thuk, PHN 12, PHN 13. Franklin County Domestic Relations Court smelled faintly like old paper coffee and rain-soaked coats. Marcus Washington arrived at 8:03 a.m. carrying the black hard case himself. Outside downtown, Columbus sat beneath heavy April clouds, while television crews covered an unrelated corruption hearing on the opposite side of the courthouse steps. People moved through metal detectors with tired expressions and folded umbrellas. Inside courtroom 4B, everything felt strangely quiet, controlled. Marcus preferred that. Chaos hid details, silence exposed them. Rebecca Sloan walked beside him carrying 3 binders and a slim laptop case. "You sleep at all?" she asked quietly. "A little." Rebecca glanced at the black case. "You ready?" Marcus looked toward the courtroom doors. Yes, but readiness did not mean peace. His stomach still tightened when he thought about Caleb sitting somewhere behind this entire legal disaster, trying to understand how his family became evidence exhibits. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes later with Richard Feldman. She looked pale, more fragile than angry now. Lorraine entered behind them, wearing another immaculate cream-colored suit with a silver cross necklace, resting carefully against the fabric. Public image fully assembled. Marcus noticed something else too. Lorraine did not look at him anymore, not directly. Judge Elaine Porter entered at 9 o'clock sharp. Mid-60s, controlled voice, 30 years of courtroom fatigue visible in her posture. Marcus liked her immediately because she wasted no motion, no theatrical authority, just structure. Everyone stood. The hearing began. Richard Feldman spoke first. He leaned heavily into emotional framing, unhealthy marital environment, emotional distance controlling behavioral patterns, instability affecting Vanessa's well-being. Marcus listened calmly while rain tapped softly against courthouse windows. Feldman's argument sounded polished, but Marcus noticed something important, very little specificity. Rebecca noticed too. When her turn came, she stood slowly and approached the bench with 1 binder in hand. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this case involves extensive allegations of emotional abuse and manipulation directed toward my client." She paused briefly. "We intend to demonstrate that those narratives were systematically influenced over nearly 2 decades by a third party." Rebecca did not look toward Lorraine when she said it. She didn't need to. Judge Porter adjusted her glasses slightly. "Proceed," Rebecca called Marcus first. Marcus walked to the witness stand quietly, right hand raised, sworn in, then seated. Richard Feldman began cross-examination immediately. "Mr. Washington," he said smoothly, "isn't it true your wife frequently described you as emotionally unavailable?" Marcus answered evenly. She used those words often. "And were you emotionally unavailable?" Number Feldman paced slowly. "Yet you recorded your family secretly for 16 years. Yes, that's not normal behavior, is it?" Marcus looked directly at him. "Neither is being falsely accused for 16 years. The courtroom grew slightly quieter after that. Feldman adjusted direction. "You monitored financial activity obsessively. I monitored shared finances. You tracked conversations. I documented conversations. You built files against your own wife." Marcus paused briefly. "Then I preserved evidence after repeated manipulation." Judge Porter watched him carefully. Marcus noticed that too. Not suspiciously. Analytically. Feldman attempted another angle. "Mr. Washington, would you describe yourself as emotionally expressive?" Marcus answered honestly. "No." "And isn't it possible your emotional detachment created fear inside your home?" Marcus folded his hands together calmly. "No." "Why not?" "Because calmness is not abuse." Silence followed, short, heavy. Feldman returned to his table. Rebecca stood immediately afterward. "Mr. Washington," she said, "when did you first begin documenting conversations year 3 of the marriage?" Why Marcus looked briefly toward Vanessa, then toward the judge, because events kept changing after they happened. Rebecca nodded once. Can you clarify? Marcus spoke carefully. Arguments were rewritten later. Conversations were described inaccurately. Emotional narratives replaced factual ones repeatedly. Rebecca approached the evidence table. Did you confront anyone initially? Yes. What happened? It made things worse. Rebecca pressed a button on her laptop. Audio filled the courtroom speakers. Lorraine's voice echoed clearly. Don't argue facts. Argue feelings. Facts can be defended. Feelings can't. Even after hearing the recording multiple times already, the courtroom reacted visibly. Judge Porter leaned slightly forward. Rebecca let the silence settle before speaking again. Mr. Washington, did you manipulate this recording in any way? No. Was it legally obtained? Yes. Rebecca played another. You should reduce how much alone time Marcus gets with Caleb. Gradually. This time, Vanessa closed her eyes. Lorraine remained motionless beside her attorney, but Marcus noticed the tension in her jaw. Rebecca approached the witness stand. Did you ever threaten your wife physically? No. Did you ever prevent her from accessing money? No. Did you ever instruct Caleb to hate his mother or grandmother? Marcus answered immediately. No. Rebecca nodded once. No further questions. Then came Lorraine Bennett's testimony. She walked to the stand with controlled dignity. For the first several minutes, she performed well. Measured voice, concerned tone, carefully selected language. I only wanted to protect my daughter. Judge Porter listened without interruption. Then Rebecca began cross-examination. Mrs. Bennett, Rebecca said calmly, did you encourage Vanessa to use the phrase emotionally unsafe during therapy? Lorraine folded her hands tightly. I may have discussed communication techniques. Rebecca pressed play. Focus on emotional safety. Therapists react to that. Lorraine's face tightened. Rebecca continued immediately. Did you encourage custody positioning before divorce proceedings? Numbers, another recording played. You should reduce how much alone time Marcus gets with Caleb. Rebecca paused the audio halfway through. Would you like the remainder played too? Lorraine said nothing. Rebecca stepped closer. Mrs. Bennett, can you identify a single documented instance where Marcus Washington endangered his son physically? Number verbally, Lorraine hesitated. No. Financially, no. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then what exactly justified discussing custody limitation strategies years before divorce? Lorraine shifted slightly in the witness chair. Emotional instability. Rebecca's voice remained calm. Defined how Lorraine opened her mouth. Nothing concrete arrived. Again. Rebecca picked up another transcript binder. Mrs. Bennett, over 16 years, you repeatedly characterized Mr. Washington as controlling, emotionally dangerous, manipulative, and unsafe. She opened the binder carefully. Can you identify one specific event supporting those labels? Silence. Longer now. Judge Porter watched closely. Lorraine finally answered. It was cumulative. Rebecca nodded once, meaning emotional impressions rather than factual incidents. Richard Feldman objected immediately. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Porter replied. But the damage was already visible, because the courtroom felt the absence now. No police reports, no violence, no threats, no documented intimidation, only narrative. Rebecca delivered the final question quietly. Mrs. Bennett, can you identify one marital conflict between Marcus and Vanessa that you did not involve yourself in somehow? The courtroom became completely silent. Rain hammered against the windows harder now. Lorraine looked toward Vanessa instinctively. Vanessa stared downward. Lorraine looked back toward Rebecca. Nothing came. For the first time since Marcus met her 18 years earlier, Lorraine Bennett appeared genuinely uncertain. Not angry, not polished, cornered. Judge Porter waited patiently. Still nothing. Marcus watched carefully from counsel table. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Because 18 years of emotional erosion had finally collided with structure, evidence, chronology, recorded reality. Judge Porter removed her glasses slowly. "I'll review all submitted materials before final ruling," she said calmly. Court recessed shortly afterward. People stood slowly around the courtroom. Papers shuffled, chairs moved, muted conversations returned. Marcus closed the black case carefully beside the table. Across the room, Vanessa remained seated motionless, while Lorraine whispered urgently beside her. But Vanessa no longer looked reassured by her mother's voice. And for the first time since this entire process began, Marcus noticed something else inside the courtroom. People were no longer looking at him like the dangerous person in the room. They were looking at Lorraine. The final ruling came 3 weeks later, on a cold Monday morning in May. Rain had finally stopped over Columbus, but the city still looked washed out beneath pale gray skies. Marcus parked outside Franklin County Domestic Relations Court at 7:41 a.m. and sat inside the Honda for nearly 2 minutes before turning off the engine. Not praying, not rehearsing, just breathing. The courthouse steps glistened faintly from overnight rain, while attorneys carrying leather briefcases moved quickly through security lines. Marcus carried the black case one final time. By then it felt heavier emotionally than physically. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was different from previous hearings. Quieter, less theatrical. The emotional certainty Vanessa's side once carried had faded almost completely after the recording surfaced. Richard Feldman no longer moved confidently around the courtroom. Vanessa looked exhausted in a way Marcus had never seen before. Not angry anymore, not defensive, just emotionally worn down by the realization that years of memories no longer fit together cleanly. Lorraine Bennett still dressed perfectly, still controlled her posture, still wore pearls. But the room no longer reacted to her presence the same way. People listened cautiously now, not automatically. Judge Elaine Porter entered exactly at 9 a.m. Everyone stood. Marcus noticed Caleb seated quietly in the back row beside a court-appointed family representative. 17 years old now, too old to be shielded from any of this completely. Their eyes met briefly. Caleb gave a small nod. Marcus returned it once. Then Judge Porter began reading. Her voice remained steady and clinical. After reviewing testimony, financial records, counseling, documentation, communication logs, and authenticated recordings, Marcus listened without moving. The court finds insufficient evidence supporting claims of emotional abuse, coercive financial control, or parental intimidation by Mr. Washington. Silence settled heavily across the courtroom. Vanessa lowered her eyes immediately. Lorraine's jaw tightened. Judge Porter continued. The court additionally finds substantial evidence of prolonged third-party interference in the marital relationship. Rebecca Sloan remained perfectly expressionless beside Marcus, but he noticed her hand stop moving across her legal pad. That was enough. Judge Porter adjusted her glasses slightly. The recordings demonstrate repeated coaching regarding emotional framing, therapy manipulation, financial positioning, and pre-divorce custody strategy. Lorraine finally shifted visibly in her chair. Not dramatically, just enough. The judge continued. The court is particularly concerned by discussions encouraging limitation of the father-son relationship absent evidence of harm. Caleb looked down at his hands in the back row. Marcus felt something heavy loosen inside his chest for the first time in years. Not victory, relief, a different thing entirely. Judge Porter moved into financial rulings next. The marital home would be sold with equity divided fairly. Marcus's retirement accounts remained protected due to documented inheritance separation and financial tracing established by Rebecca. Vanessa retained her personal savings accounts but received no additional claims tied to alleged financial oppression. Then came custody. The court recognizes both parents as loving and capable, Judge Porter said calmly. Vanessa began crying quietly beside her attorney. Marcus looked forward without reacting. However, the judge continued, the court also recognizes that emotional narratives surrounding Mr. Washington were significantly influenced by external interference over many years. Lorraine closed her eyes briefly. Judge Porter's voice hardened slightly. Accordingly, the court orders joint parental decision-making authority with expanded discretion granted to Caleb Washington, given his age and demonstrated maturity. Caleb exhaled visibly in the back row. Marcus finally glanced toward him again. The boy looked relieved more than happy, as if years of tension had finally stopped pressing against his ribs. Then Judge Porter addressed Lorraine directly. "Mrs. Bennett." Lorraine straightened automatically. "The court strongly advises that you refrain from involvement in future parental disputes or custody exchanges." The courtroom became very still again. Judge Porter continued carefully. "Your conduct as documented through admitted evidence materially escalated marital instability rather than resolving it. No raised voice, no humiliation, just official recognition, which somehow felt harsher." Lorraine tried speaking. "I was only protecting," Judge Porter interrupted immediately. "No, Mrs. Bennett." The interruption landed like a hammer. "You were influencing." Silence. Complete silence. Marcus watched Lorraine carefully then. For 18 years, she controlled emotional gravity inside every room she entered. Conversations bent toward her interpretations automatically. Now that gravity was gone, because evidence had replaced personality, Judge Porter finalized remaining procedural matters over the next 15 minutes. Then finally, this court is adjourned. The gavel struck once. People began standing slowly. Papers shuffled. Chairs moved. Muted conversations returned cautiously around the room. Marcus closed the black case one final time. The sound echoed softly through the courtroom. Across the aisle, Vanessa remained seated while Richard Feldman quietly explained next legal steps beside her. Lorraine stood alone near the counsel table, adjusting papers with unusually stiff movements. No relatives surrounded her. No comforting church friends waited nearby. No emotional audience remained. Just fluorescent lights and recorded truth. Rebecca touched Marcus lightly on the shoulder. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do," she said quietly. Marcus nodded once. "Thank you." Rebecca gathered her files. "You know, most people would have exploded years ago." Marcus looked toward the black case. "Most people probably should have." Rebecca almost smiled. "No," she said softly. "Most people would have lost." Outside the courthouse, cold wind moved through downtown streets while reporters chased another legal story entirely unrelated to them. Marcus descended the courthouse steps beside Caleb. Neither spoke immediately. Traffic hummed nearby. A city bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Finally, Caleb asked, "So, it's over?" Marcus looked out across High Street. "Mostly." Caleb shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets. "I still can't believe Grandma actually said all that stuff." Marcus studied his son carefully. "What matters now is what you do with the truth." Caleb nodded slowly, not fully understanding yet, but trying. Behind them, courthouse doors opened again. Vanessa emerged first. Lorraine followed several steps behind. The distance between them looked small physically, enormous emotionally. Vanessa approached Marcus carefully. For a second, Marcus remembered their first apartment together, cheap furniture, takeout dinners, laughing over broken smoke detectors, a whole life before suspicion became permanent. Vanessa's eyes were red. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just tired truth. Marcus looked at her for several seconds, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, acknowledgement. Lorraine stopped farther back near the courthouse railing. For the first time Marcus had ever known her, she looked uncertain where to stand. People passed without recognizing her authority anymore, without orbiting around her certainty, without asking what she thought. Caleb glanced toward his grandmother briefly, then looked away first. That moment hurt Lorraine more than the ruling itself. Marcus saw it clearly, because influence only existed while people emotionally depended on it. And for the first time, nobody in her family did. Marcus picked up the black case again. Then he walked past Lorraine without saying a single word. She turned slightly as he passed, perhaps expecting confrontation at last. Some delayed anger, some final accusation. Marcus gave her nothing, just silence. The same silence she spent 18 years mistaking for weakness. Marcus Washington moved into the Worthington house 3 months after the divorce finalized. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, small fenced backyard, built in 1958. The kitchen cabinets were older than Caleb, and the hardwood floors creaked near the hallway every time someone walked past the laundry room. Marcus liked it immediately, not because it was impressive, because it was quiet. The first morning there, he woke before sunrise out of habit and stood barefoot in the kitchen while coffee brewed slowly beside the window. No tension upstairs, no late-night phone calls, no voices lowering when he entered rooms. Just silence. Real silence this time. Outside, early autumn fog drifted across the neighborhood while sprinklers clicked rhythmically somewhere down the street. Marcus leaned both hands against the counter and listened carefully. Peace sounded unfamiliar at first, almost suspicious. Caleb moved in gradually. At 17, he split time between both parents while finishing high school. Some weeks he stayed 3 nights with Marcus, other weeks longer. The adjustment felt awkward initially, not emotionally, practically. Marcus had spent years surviving inside emotional landmines. Now, ordinary moments suddenly mattered again. Laundry, groceries, driving lessons. One Saturday morning, Caleb walked into the kitchen wearing sweatpants and headphones while Marcus burned bacon accidentally on the stove. Smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Caleb stared at the pan. "You know there's a timer on your phone, right?" Marcus looked at the ruined bacon. "I got distracted." Caleb burst out laughing, real laughter, not nervous laughter, not tension management. Marcus stood there holding a spatula while the sound filled the kitchen unexpectedly. That laugh affected him more than the court ruling ever did, because it sounded light, free. The old house slowly developed routines afterward. Marcus repaired a loose fence section one weekend. Caleb painted part of the garage badly and denied it looked uneven, even when it obviously did. On Sundays, they watched football while eating takeout wings from a place near Polaris Parkway. Ordinary life returned piece by piece. Marcus still worked at Midstate Mutual Insurance downtown, still woke early, still drove the same Honda Accord despite Caleb repeatedly calling it historically depressing. But coworkers treated him differently now, not dramatically, just cleaner. The HR complaint quietly disappeared after Rebecca Sloan provided timeline documentation connected to the divorce proceedings. Harold Whitmore never mentioned it again directly. One afternoon, however, Harold paused beside Marcus's cubicle while reviewing quarterly reports. "You know," he said casually, "most people would have panicked." Marcus looked up from a fraud file. "Maybe." Harold adjusted his glasses. "Good thing you're not most people." Then he walked away. Marcus returned to work without responding. That was enough. Vanessa moved into a condominium near Westerville after selling the marital home. At first, communication between her and Marcus remained stiff and procedural. Pickup times, school schedules, college applications, nothing personal. But slowly small changes appeared. Vanessa stopped repeating Lorraine's emotional phrases automatically, stopped framing every disagreement like a psychological emergency, stopped calling her mother after every difficult conversation. The separation happened gradually enough that Marcus doubted she fully noticed it herself. One evening in October, Marcus arrived home after work and found an envelope taped to the front door, handwritten, from Vanessa. Marcus opened it inside the kitchen while pasta boiled quietly on the stove. The letter was 4 pages long, no dramatic apology, no excuses, just honesty written carefully line by line. Vanessa admitted she stopped trusting her own interpretations years earlier. Lorraine became emotional translator for nearly every conflict. Therapy language replaced direct communication. Marcus's silence eventually felt suspicious because Lorraine constantly described it that way. One section made Marcus stop reading briefly. I think somewhere along the way I stopped hearing your actual voice and only heard what my mother said. Your silence meant. Marcus stood motionless in the kitchen for several seconds after reading that line. Steam rose quietly from the boiling pot beside him. Upstairs, Caleb argued loudly with online friends through a gaming headset. Normal noise. Healthy noise. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a drawer rather than throwing it away. Not reconciliation, not romance, just recognition. Months passed. Winter arrived hard that year. Snow covered Worthington in thick, uneven layers, while Marcus spent Saturday morning shoveling the driveway before Caleb woke up. One afternoon in January, Marcus finally carried the black case downstairs into the basement storage room, the same case he carried into court, the same case that held 16 years of recordings. He placed it carefully on a metal shelf beside old tax files and Army memorabilia boxes. Then he opened it one last time. External drives, transcript binders, labels arranged chronologically. Marcus stared at them quietly. So much of his life reduced into documentation. Pain organized alphabetically. He picked up one drive, year 3, the beginning. Marcus could still remember sitting at the kitchen table hearing Lorraine explain how to manipulate therapy sessions. That moment changed everything. Not because he became cruel afterward, because he became prepared. Marcus returned the drive carefully into the case. Then he closed the lid, locked it, and slid the case permanently toward the back of the shelf. Not destroyed, not celebrated, stored. Evidence mattered when survival required proof. But survival no longer required listening. Later that evening, Caleb came downstairs holding 2 bowls of microwave popcorn. "You hiding bodies down here," Marcus almost smiled. "Just old records." Caleb handed him a bowl. "You ever gonna listen to those again?" Marcus looked toward the shelf briefly. "No." "Why keep them?" Marcus thought about that for a moment. "Because sometimes surviving something matters, even after it's over." Caleb nodded slowly like he understood part of the answer, but not all of it yet. That was okay. Some lessons belonged to age. Upstairs, snow tapped softly against the windows, while the furnace hummed through the house. Marcus followed Caleb back into the kitchen. The bacon still burned occasionally. The cabinets still squeaked. The floor still creaked near the hallway. But peace had finally become ordinary enough that Marcus no longer questioned it every morning. As they ate popcorn and watched late-night highlights from college basketball games, Caleb laughed again at one of Marcus's dry comments about terrible defense coverage. Marcus looked toward his son across the kitchen table. Warm light, steam rising from coffee, snow outside, no accusations, no emotional traps waiting behind ordinary conversations. Just quiet, real quiet. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Marcus Washington understood the difference between silence and peace. Some people think strength is loud. They think the strongest person in the room is the one who argues harder, speaks sharper, or reacts faster. But Marcus Washington's story shows something different. Real strength is sometimes the ability to stay calm while your name is being rewritten in front of people you love. It's the discipline to prepare instead of explode. It's understanding that truth without proof can disappear very quickly in an emotional world. What happened to Marcus also reveals how dangerous slow manipulation can be. Not every broken family collapses because of one betrayal or one dramatic moment. Sometimes it happens quietly over years, through repeated suggestions, planted doubts, emotional pressure, and constant reframing of reality. That's why patience matters. Documentation matters, boundaries matter, and most importantly, protecting your peace matters. If this story touched you in any way, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a situation where silence was mistaken for weakness, or where someone slowly manipulated the people around you? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy deep emotional stories about betrayal, resilience, justice, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel now. Tomorrow's story involves a family business, a hidden inheritance, and a secret that stayed buried for 22 years.